Welcome to the Enneagram with Chelsea and Nicole. This is a positively deviant culture podcast anchored in the Enneagram. Continuing on with the conversation of the type 7, this particular segment is focused on the paradoxes of the type 7. Before we get into those, just a quick reminder.
Every episode, I want to remind listeners that this isn't a prescriptive fixed tool and that our conversations are designed to work with the material and the ideas in an exploratory way. As long as I've been working with the Enneagram, my knowledge and application continues to evolve, and that's what we're here to do, to keep learning.
We're going to start with really the reason why there's even a focus on paradoxes. What do the paradoxes reveal about this type that's so essential?
The paradoxes in every type are the secret key places to our integration. They're the less visible places that are in contradiction. And it is the kind of poetry that is embedded in our being. And so I find it one of the most important conversations to have is to reveal the paradoxes for each type.
This tends to be both of our favorite conversation. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so here it is, sevens. Are you listening? I'm going to start with the punch in the beginning and not the end. The most significant, powerful thing for sevens to understand and learn and to exist inside is this truth. Our capacity for pain is the same capacity for joy. Khalil Gibran said this better, that the same well from which our suffering exists, so is our joy. In other words, however big that bucket is, it is absolutely forged by suffering. If you do not suffer very much and have very little pain in your life, if you have a low capacity for pain, that is also a low capacity for real joy. The only way to experience a super expansive, big joy is if that is carved out by pain and suffering. And so this is the very intimate and fragile place for a 7 to learn. If we really want to experience joy, there is no joy outside of suffering. That our relationship and our experience and our understanding of joy is forged by suffering and pain. Additionally, not done yet. If that wasn't big enough, if that wasn't a big enough hit, the other secret place for a 7 to learn and to embody is their understanding of freedom. The most powerful places of freedom, the most true and real places of freedom exist only in limitation. 7's definition of freedom has to expand and be busted, exploded, that it's like jazz, that it's only within the limitation of our mastery that we're actually can express the truest freedom, that we can't experience freedom outside of restriction and limitation. Now, I'm not talking about all restriction, all limitation. I'm not talking about dumb and unintelligent restriction and limitation, but inside very intelligent and conscious and intentional limitation and restriction is where we find the most pure and expansive forms of freedom. These are two pretty powerful inversions that are unexpected and not what 7s believe. And by the way, it's this for all of us.
I mean, the magnitude that 7s are able to fulfill their life task of joy is directly tied to the magnitude in which they're able to sit with pain. I really liked the mental picture of the pain carving out the bucket and the size and the depth of the well, that then joy can fill that space. And so no joy without pain or suffering is another way to say it.
It's a beautiful place, and it is counterintuitive, which is why the paradox conversation is so important to me and so essential to me, is that these are the secret places that land so deep in our soul with so much accuracy, that these are the places that are transformative. That without these kind of insights and understanding, we flail around in our self-delusion, right? We flail around in our poor definitions of the qualities that we're after. In this case, 7 is after joy and freedom. They are the joy makers. They are the ones that teach us about freedom. Yet if they do not have intelligent understanding, experience, definition of freedom, it's not true freedom. It's not as expansive freedom. Similarly with joy. Joy isn't momentary satisfaction. Joy isn't a moment of even happiness. Joy is deeper. It's something far more expansive and far more comprehensive in terms of the essence of joy can change us. It's that powerful, which is not the same as being in a state of happiness, for example. For all of us, we have to really reconnect, deconstruct, and redefine what it is that we're after. What is it in different kind of reality in the deeper places that's more honest, that's more complete of what we're actually designed to inspire and create in the world?
It returns to the idea that 7s have access to the sobering nature of their one integration point to bring this kind of sobriety and balance and anchoring of joy in the reality that dualities exist. And that's what creates the fullness of this experience of joy. In the freedom portion, I have definitely experimented with this in my own life. And when you remove all constraints, thinking that that's going to lead to freedom, it's the exact opposite. You just become limited by the amount of choices, essentially, is what it becomes. And so I really love this idea that the structure and the limitations are what allow you to find the true source and most essential nature of freedom. Again, and 7's existential job is to teach us about joy and freedom. And so going to these secret spaces and really nailing the more complex definition of these words, they're the ones to show us, right?
Absolutely. 7s take on this role with a more expansive spectrum, which again, all these words that I can even think of and use are all 7 words. They're levels of expansiveness, right? It's not like, you have a moment of something that's true, but then you take it to the next level and it's a little bit more, it's expanding and expanding and expanding, right? And so the outer limits of expansion, right? This is where the 7s exist. The ability that 7s have to continue to expand and push their own expansion of themselves and others. This is what I'm speaking to. That yes, we have momentary experiences of freedom and momentary experiences of joy, but how do we exist? How do we abide in freedom and joy? That is a different conversation than how do we experience joy and freedom. And for all of us, that is the ultimate places of satisfaction, is when we can abide in our gifts and in our brilliance in a way that transforms not only ourselves, but each other and the world. That's the place.
How do we even move from this point? I mean, there's like no words because it hits at such a depth in my soul. So what are some of the other paradoxes for 7s?
A metaphor that is often spoke about, not my idea, my teachers said this, but 7s have this experience, again, paradoxically, of being at a banquet table where there is the riches of the world, all of the experiences and flavors of food and friends and environment and joy and spectacular elements of fun and celebration. And yet they can't enjoy it. And the paradox here is that when 7s are overly fixated on creating an external experience, they can't internally experience it. It's all externalized. It is imagined in their mind and created in the external world, but they're not able to be in touch with it in their hearts. And the place of connection to their heart and how it makes them feel is not present. And so this is a sad place, where the 7s can create their lives this way, where they're creating all of these external experiences and instigating joy for others and being fun and creating entertainment and all of the things, but they're not actually able to enjoy it. For two reasons, sevens can't experience the joy that they're creating in the world, or this banquet, and metaphorically. It's one, because they're disconnected from their emotional worlds and their feelings. And also part of this disconnection and how it's related is because they're fixated in imagining the future. So they're caught in their minds and in imagination of what the future will be. And they're anticipating the next fun thing or the next good thing, the next amazing experience. They're fantasizing and imagining this in their minds, combined with being disconnected to their emotional states, so that sevens can't enjoy what they have in the present that's right in front of them. It's right there. There's this banquet that is in their name, and they can't experience it. And so when sevens hear about this, they relate to this experience. And it's a sad place. The paradox is here, where all of the energy and skills and talents of a seven is actually self-sabotaging and being used against themselves, which we all do.
Is there an invitation in that moment for sevens?
This paradox is where, instead of authentically and honestly and wholeheartedly engaging reality and experience in the world, they're avoiding it. And it becomes addiction. It becomes escapism. It becomes self-medicating. And it's an over-identification and an over-fixation with an outcome, not the process of how we get there. All of these things occur, in all of us. But for sevens, this is what it looks like. It's the speed over the process. So another paradox here would be like sevens are incredibly impatient and hyperactive. They don't have a lot of attention or focus, which in their best state is a way that they can have multiple information inputs all at the same time and be processing and kind of absorbing all these things, right? It's a good thing. Misused, the paradox becomes impatience and speed, losing all quality, losing accuracy, hyperactivity, a kind of demand for new experiences and variety. So, it becomes hedonistic rather than an actual connection to the experience itself. It becomes something else. Other examples of paradoxes would be, the good side of sevens, which is they're amazing at being optimistic, finding goodness, right? And yet in an overuse or a misuse of their optimism, it becomes superficiality, where they only want the good things. They only want the positive things. And so anything that could be, substantive is often skipped and just becomes superficial. Similarly, potential is different than optimism, but sevens are brilliant at discovering, identifying, investing in potential and all of the things that could be like amazing and wonderful. And the paradox there is that they can go into idealization, where everything is created in their mind as something better than it actually is, in ways that are not real, that aren't actually rooted in any reality or pragmatism. They're entirely a fantasy and a source of imagination that they continually get disappointed by over and over because it's a fixation. Sevens will end up going to quick fixes, quick ways of making money, overly risky things that aren't grounded in reality or facts, and taking chances just because they can. It's a less conscious way of proving their freedom, but then creates absolute slavery. Some sevens can become highly in debt if you're gambling, or if you're taking too much risks where you're losing money. You lose all kinds of freedom when you become indebted because of your decisions, right? The last couple that I wanted to mention was how their ability to take in and absorb information and absorb experiences with so much frequency and intensity and variety is awesome, in terms of experimenting and exploring. But the paradox here is when it goes opposite, which is gluttony. And it's never enough, which is similar to greed. But the nuance here between greed and gluttony is that gluttony is attached to this ability to absorb a lot. The reality that sevens can not take anything for granted, and they can see the good and how everything is so wonderful, that gratitude is what allows us to exist in enough. That this is enough that we have been gifted with. I'm not taking this for granted. It's here and this is good and this fulfills. This is actually satisfying. Greed comes in as the opposite, which is it's not enough. So greed and gluttony are similar here in that this inverse happens in terms of their ability to deeply exist in gratitude and have high levels of absorption. Overused or misused can become greed and gluttony.
Yeah, that's what we always end up, ending with, I think, in these conversations, is that all of the beautiful, wonderful gifts that have been given to each type in their personality, when overused, become misused and often become the very opposite of what they're designed to bring to the world. And that's where the pain begins. And these are natural. These are occurrences in every human being. The goal here, I think, is to shine light on them and bring an awareness to how can we, honestly, it's funny, the word limit comes to mind, but how can we ration the amount of goodness that we're putting out in the world so that it doesn't become destructive?
It's about temperance, right? And it's about self-control. It's the best of a 1 and the best of a 5 bring to 7 in order for 7s to remain in their, core brilliance and the best of themselves. And this really beautifully ties to the last paradox, which is that 7s have a high tolerance for external pain. And so when we talk about their core fear of being trapped in pain, that is specifically related to internal pain. Yeah, they don't like external pain either, but they have actually a pretty high tolerance for external pain because that's what you need if you're an adventurer and an explorer in the physical world. And to be in circumstances that are very uncomfortable, uncertain, chaotic, high risk. These are actually externally painful places. What 7s are trying to avoid, the trap of the internal pain, that they won't be able to process the internal pain and they won't be able to move away from any external pain as they desire. The inversion here is that they become deficient in their capacity to handle any pain. It is a deep place of immaturity in the sense of like a child, where there's fit throwing, tantrums, demands for immediate pain relief, like whatever that is, whether it comes to food or sex or movies or fun or adventure, whatever it is, that there's no ability to sit with any kind of deprivation internally or externally, which is a form of being trapped. You're not free when you are so demanding and have such a great need that you cannot sit with. What at the core is happening here in this inversion, in this paradox, is that you are overly identifying with a pleasure state when you're not actually dealing with your inner world and your emotions so that you can locate the true and real places of joy and gratitude and expansiveness and freedom, that it isn't about your external states, that those things exist in your internal world, in your heart and in your emotional world. So what 7s tend to do in this paradox is they skip the internal terrain to get to an end, and they completely fixate or overly commit themselves to an outcome, which means that the process is not important. And that comes out in their work, this paradox where they'll leave things very quickly or leave relationships very quickly. 7s are not the only runners, but 7s are the quintessential runners, meaning they're going to run away. They're going to run away when things get difficult. And if they don't run away, they're going to throw a fit if they stay. And they're going to have a lot of demands and a lot of needs in order to resolve this internal place of discomfort. And they're going to make those demands on everyone else. And so this is the paradoxical place. And these places end up completely killing the actual job, what they're designed to provide the world, which is joy and freedom. This is the most sad place, where we land in the paradox. But there is hope. And we've talked about that in the beginning.
Yeah. And I'm just so grateful to any 7s if they're still listening, because this is kind of a painful episode to engage with, right? And to stay with it and to not jump to how can I self-soothe and stay with the joy, which is wonderful. We talked about that at the very beginning. Like, we need these people, and we're so lucky to have sevens in our lives. We're so lucky to have access to go to that seven place and materialize joy and freedom. And there's another dimension, another side of that that's equally important when you talk about process versus just the end goal, or substantiation, or the ability to be present and enjoy all of this limitless excitement that they were able to envision and bring to life.
We need sevens. We need our joy makers. We need the human experience of freedom. And I think that this is, I mean, like each type, all 9 types brings a key element to incarnation and to the deepest satisfaction and connection that we have with our world. And freedom and joy, I think, most specifically comes into play in the inner world. It's easy for sevens to cause us to experience this in our external world, but inside of our relationships, where there's the most pain. Relationships are probably the source of more pain than anything else in our world. And those are the very places where we need to understand joy and freedom and how to exist in uncomfortable places that require enormous amount of resources, where we can still feel free and we can still have joy. That is what sevens ultimately teach us. And this is absolutely necessary in order to get to how we actually meet our places of deprivation. Sevens provide. It's through the real, honest experience of joy and freedom. This is how we become alive. This is where we are now no longer in states of deprivation, is when we can truly experience deep joy and true freedom.
This conversation is just profound to me. Like, I love going to this place because, just to cast a paradox on the nature of this conversation compared to what we see as a title for the seven, it's like, oh, they're the enthusiast. And you just kind of leave it at that, right? It's just these packages of behaviors. And I mean, this conversation is a great testament to why we're doing this, right? To expand and uncover such deeper places.
Oh yeah. The titles, I feel like, are so, oh hell no. They're so reductionary in nature, and they don't express the most powerful places of human experience and the most powerful places of human, I think, maybe transcendence. I don't know. But it is absolutely why we're doing this, and so important to connect to the sevens around us and the seven in us.
Yeah, this is the inspiration that we both find in the Enneagram, and that we're inviting other people to learn about and be equally inspired to go to that place. Well, thank you for listening. If you'd like to engage with us, find our link in the show notes, give us a quick follow, and you'll be notified of future episodes. And thank you so much for coming on this journey with us.